Since 2019, the Pokemon trading card game has deteriorated into a broken and unfixable mess. Entire series are frequently decided before they even begin, and 50-minute games become as stale to watch as watching paint dry. But there's one card that will shift the trajectory of the Pokemon TCG for the next few years as we know it, and there's a reason why it's selling for up to $1,000 after only being out for just a few months. This is how Iono saved competitive Pokemon TCG. In my opinion, the beginning of the downfall of the Pokemon TCG in recent years is synonymous with the release of Tag Team GX Pokemon in the Team Up expansion. Tag Team GX has had a new interesting feature that had never been seen before. They gave up 3 prize cards when knocked out, which is half of the 6 prize cards required to win a game. These Pokemon had such powerful attacks, in order for a deck to beat them, they had to be able to knock out the tag teams in one hit, meaning many games were as short as they ever had been, frequently as few as 3 or 4 turns. The wars of attrition that were present in the past were lost almost entirely, and this wasn't a good thing. Games were constantly decided by who could take the first knockout, as because the games were so short, the first person to take a knockout had a bigger advantage than ever before. A Pokemon game could last up to 30 minutes, but be decided in the first 5. And while the game still included skill, it came down to who could play their cards in the correct order throughout the game, instead of the exciting and flashy plays that had been possible in the past. The comebacks and close games that made the Pokemon card game so much fun to play and watch at this point seemed like they were going away for good. And even though games were short, there was one thing that could have saved them that was barely existent: disruption. All good card games have disruption, but at this time Pokemon's disruption was lacking. Hand disruption is the main form of disruption in the Pokemon TCG. It refers to cards that change your opponent's hand in some way. When tag teams released, the only hand disruption we had were Judge and Let Loose Marshadow, which both had the same effect. Shovel both players' hand into their deck and draw 4 cards. While this creates interaction in theory, in practice it actually had the opposite effect. In Pokemon, players start with nothing and have to use their cards to establish a board state with Pokemon, Energy, and Trainer cards to get Pokemon and Energy into play. The first few turns are crucial for setting up, so having only 4 cards in hand compared to starting 7 is a big deal, although later in the game when you're already set up, you may only need 1 or 2 cards to finish off the game. This meant that since Marshadow and Judge did the same thing the entire game, instead of using these cards to make comebacks, they would instead be used to brick your opponent for a cheap win in the early turns, meaning the games were still decided by how well you set up, not how well you played. Marshadow went down as one of the worst design decisions ever made, as it could be played going first, leaving your opponent with nothing before they even started their first turn, giving an even further advantage to the player going first, and while Judge was completely fine as supporters can be played going first, it didn't fit the missing hole in the format. Soon after, Reset Stamp was printed, which was closer to what was needed for the game as it had the perfect effect. Your opponent shuffles their hand into their deck and draws equal to their remaining prize cards. This will be important later, but what you need to know is that this is the solution to the issues Let Loose Marshadow and Judge had. At the beginning of the game, Reset Stamp gives 6 cards, which is the same as the hand size players have on the first turn after starting a basic. But later in the game, Reset Stamp can be used as a relatively consistent way to stop your opponent from having the exact card they need, facilitating comebacks. But Reset Stamp had its issues too. It was an item that provided no consistency whatsoever. Situational cards like Reset Stamp are relatively rare in top performing deck lists, as they are often replaced by high quantities of the cards that help this setup, as there is no guarantee you will be able to find situational cards when they are useful, and maximizing the chances of setting up is the most important element of the Pokemon TCG. For this reason, some of the best deck lists like Henry Brand's World Champion winning list excluded the card entirely. While Reset Stamp was a step in the right direction, better was needed. In the next few years, there was no change to the speed of the game. Even more oppressive tag teams were printed, the worst of which was Arceus Dialga Palkia, which not only gave up 3 prize cards, but could take additional prize cards with its GX attack. And right before tag teams rotated out of the standard format, VMAX Pokemon were released to take their place, which also gave up 3 prize cards. Mew VMAX was the worst of it. Mew VMAX could do as much damage as was almost always needed, copying Techno Blast and using Power Tablets and Choice Belt, and had an unbreakable draw engine with Genesec's ability Fusion Strike's system. If you started slow and missed a turn against Mew, there was no coming back, and every strong new card seemed to make the issue worse. Arceus V-Star and Palkia V-Star heavily relied on going first, and drawing either Arceus and Energy or a lot of basics as they needed to start attacking with their big attacks on the second turn of the game. And Lugia V-Star played entirely off the board past turn 2 in almost every game. These decks' issues were opening consistency and heavy reliance on the opening coin flip, not late game power, until something changed. The Lost Zone engine had a perfect resolution to this issue. It had upside to both going first and second. If you went first, you were able to usually get 2 additional cards into the Lost Zone using Comfy's Flower Selecting, which would help you use the big power plays of this deck, Mirage Gate or Sableye, slightly sooner. But the main difference was what you could do going second. Cramorant's ability allowed you to attack on the first turn going second if you used Colress and 2 Flower Selecting. So now you could actually achieve meaningful damage on the first turn going second. Therefore, Lost Zone didn't really mind whether it went first or second. While it was still heavily reliant on drawing Battle VIP Pass and Chorus's Experiment on the first turn, it felt less random on the early turns than most of the decks for the last few years. Instead, it was prone to running out of ways to finish the game. Now, what happened to Disruption? Money was printed, which was basically Judge on steroids, which was terrible for the game as instead of being played as a 1-of, it was often played as a 4-of. But around when Lost Zone was printed, something crazy happened. Roxanne reads if your opponent has 3 or fewer prize cards remaining, you could shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 6 cards, while your opponent only draws 2 cards. This was so close to the disruption we were looking for. Roxanne was incredibly effective at the end of the game, but had some of the same issues as Reset Stamp. If you draw it early, it does nothing, and it's unreliable to draw it at the right time. Andres Gubal decided not to play it in his World Champion winning deck, which was a big deal as this deck was built around disruption. But it seemed like Pokemon was trending in the right direction, until one day we got an announcement that would change the way the Pokemon TCG is played, at least until it rotates. Pokemon was printing Iono. Iono reads shuffle your hand, put it at the bottom of your deck and draw cards equal to your remaining prize cards. While this is not a new effect, it was an astronomical change from the hand disruption effects that have been present for the past few years. In the early game, Iono allows you to draw 6 cards which imitate some of the strongest draw supporters the game has ever seen. This meant the decks can justify a high count of Iono and not sacrifice their odds of setting up. With Iono, for any deck that played it, games where you didn't draw perfect and started off on the back foot, you could still win by not only putting your opponent to few cards on the final turn, but playing multiple Iono throughout the middle of the game to slow your opponent down just a little bit, to give yourself the edge needed to come back a small deficit, which was something that had been so improbable for the last 4 years. For this reason, Iono has allowed Gardevoir EX to move from a tier 2 deck all the way to the best deck in format. Gardevoir EX is one of the strongest abilities ever, allowing you to attach as many energy as you like every single turn. That, when combined with Zacian V's Storm Slash and Chilling Reign Gardevoir's Brainwave, allows you to consistently knock anything out, turn after turn. But it's a setup deck that almost always goes behind 1 to 2 prizes. In the previous format, this strategy was too slow to have a good matchup against the fastest single prize decks like Lost Zone Box. But now with Iono, Gardevoir can bring a strategy of coming back every game all the way to the top of the format, which I think is a beautiful illustration for just what Iono has done for the Pokemon TCG. At the first event with Iono, which was the biggest event the Pokemon TCG has ever seen, we saw Iono have a massive effect. 7 out of the 8 top 8 decks played it, and it led to incredible wins like this game where Rowan Stave now was able to use Iono to prevent his opponent from finding an Umbreon VMAX and energy that could have given his opponent a chance to win. I couldn't be more excited to see what happens over the next few years with Iono. If you want to see me play some games with Iono, check out my second channel where I post heavily competitive content like matchup guides and my most exciting games. Sub to this channel as well while you're here. Thank you so much for watching.